jump straight into game one of our first match of the Day 2 Region Finals broadcast. So let's take a closer look at what the leads are going to be for our Pokemon trainers. On Leonardo's side of the field, there's going to be the Regieleki and the Charizard. And on the opposing side of the field with Rafael, another Regieleki, and this time paired up, however, with the Venusaur.
Yeah, it's no surprise that both Regielekis are coming out for players here. You know, I think Charizard going to be one of the bigger threats on both sides of the field, and Regieleki is probably the best Pokemon that you can utilize to kind of handle that and put a lot of pressure onto it, so it doesn't quite get the kind of the free reign of the battlefield as both players would like it to. So really, you're kind of looking, if you are Rafael or Leonardo, to remove the Regieleki on the opposing side of the field as quickly as possible, because if you do have the Charizard in the back, we know that Leonardo's got it out on the field right now. You kind of have a bit more of a free reign when that Charizard has and is able to perform without the threat of that electric type Pokemon sitting in front of you.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, the Regielekis here able to maybe try and manipulate some kind of speed control going down here on the field. But Rafael actually is going to shake things up, bring the Venusaur back into the Pokeball, doesn't want to have any of the pressure being threatened by that Charizard. Umbreon is going to be joining the action as Regieleki just goes for a Protect, which is going to match the Protect of the Charizard on Leonardo's side. So I wonder if the Regieleki on Leonardo's side will be the only one to go for any action here, and it is indeed going for that Electro Web. Going to fail to connect on the opposing Regieleki, but will catch the Umbreon on the switch in. I mean, Umbreon's known to be a pretty slow Pokemon anyway, but you know, that chip damage, that can always add up as well, Lee.
Yeah, you're right. The chip damage isn't great, but you know, Umbreon, one of those Pokemon that's very good defensively here, and the Protect from Rafael's side of the field is really nice, predicting the Protect on the Charizard, which is almost now forcing Leonardo to rethink whether he wants to probably keep it on the field or not. So we may see a switch there, which then opens the door for Rafael to maybe take advantage of a yawn that we've potentially seen on this Umbreon before, and it can put something to sleep or you know, make it difficult for whatever comes in on that slot to kind of stay. If it does, it will go to sleep.
Well, the Charizard going to retreat for Leonardo. Again, like you said, Lee facing down against the Electric-type Pokemon. It doesn't want to take that unnecessary damage, and bringing in the Ground-type Groudon's going to be able to take those attacks very easily. Obviously, it's not going to be dealing any damage. Regieleki on Leonardo's side going to go for the Electro Red once again, doing some decent damage to both of the opposing Pokemon here, and of course lowering the speed. That's now 1 speed stage lower on Regieleki and 2 on that Umbreon. Regieleki on Raphael's side, though, however, is going to go for a Electro Web of their very own. Of course, not going to connect on the Groudon, but does a little bit more damage to the Regieleki, and this is where those items can really start coming into play if Focus Sashes have been broken, for example.
Yeah, definitely, and we do see the Umbreon not opt for a yawn here, but just for a foul play, just to get some nice damage actually onto that Groudon. Like we mentioned before, any sort of chip damage that you can get at this point onto the big attacking Pokemon of your opponent's side of the field is going to be so invaluable for the late game. Now, the Regieleki here on Rafael's side of the field in a little bit of an awkward position, and Leonardo seems to have a really nice board position where he can kind of throw out some big damage with the Groudon. Makes it difficult to switch in a grounded Pokemon, and also difficult to bring in the Charizard because of the threat of the Regieleki on the opposing side of the field.
Well, I will forever and always be happy to see 2 Regielekis on the field, but at the moment it looks like they're still sticking to just going with these Electro Webs, constantly applying that pressure of reducing the speed of the opposing side of the field. It's a great strategy when you consider that Pokemon trainers do like to switch these things around to reset the stats, and you might be able to catch some damage on the way. However, it's going to be a Volt Switch there from Rafael's Regieleki. I'm eating my words a little bit, and that means the drops there are going to be able to be reset. It allows Rafael the opportunity to bring in a Pokemon from the back as well.
Yeah, and it looks like the Venusaur's coming in now, and with the Groudon on the field, with that sun in effect, the chlorophyll ability going to be active now for the Venusaur, and we're going to see a Moonlight as well, so overwriting all of that damage that the Regieleki's put onto the field already. Rafael putting himself in a great position, because now with those Electro Web drops, the Regieleki's in a little bit of an awkward spot, and also the Groudon doesn't really want to sit in front of the Venusaur either because of the G-Max Fine Lash that could potentially come out on that side of the field. But you've got to keep in mind that there is a Charizard in the back for Leonardo, and if you do decide to kind of make Venusaur your centerpiece, you've got to be aware that the Charizard could come in at any point and start to threaten you.
Well, Venusaur being able to capitalize on the fact that it is in the sun, its chlorophyll ability is activated, and Regieleki had taken that speed drop earlier. It's able to pick up the KO against it with that Sludge Bomb. However, Groudon's able to fire off a powerful Precipice Blades, doesn't manage to pick up any KOs, and will have to take the Yawn from that Umbreon. So this does force Leonardo to potentially have to switch out that Groudon so that it won't fall asleep into the next turn. Charizard, however, going to come in for Leonardo in replacement of that Regieleki, and now, Lee, we've got the 2 Pokemon on the field that love to be in the sun. This is where you have to to worry about the targeting of the sleep powder from this Venusaur, however, if it does want to go for that option.
Yeah, definitely. The Charizard, if it hasn't got an item that can kind of bypass the sleep powder from the Venusaur, it's going to be in an awkward position as well. And the fact that the Umbreon's already revealed Yawn as well, it's kind of free this turn to potentially go for that onto the Charizard if it can take an attack from the Charizard. Obviously boosted in the Sun, the G-Max Wildfire are going to be very powerful attack, and there's not many things in the format that you've got access to that can really take that attack, especially if you've got a Life Orb boosting the Charizard as well.
Exactly. The Groudon doesn't want to fall asleep, so it is going to return to its Pokeball in place of that Venusaur. So Leonardo wants to try and make advantage of the Sun here as well. Sleep Powder, however, does find its target onto that opposing Charizard. It's not going to be able to go for any moves at this turn, as it doesn't have a Lumberry or anything to wake itself up from the stupor, so it will be taking one turn of sleep. Yawn as well going to come out from that Umbreon. And I like this play here by Rafael, very safe, predicting that the Groudon would very likely switch out, so you'd be able to Yawn the Pokemon coming in as the replacement.
Yeah, it's a really nice way to kind of keep the momentum on your side of the field. You know, Rafael now can go for a potential, you could say, a grass type attack into the Venusaur here, expecting the Groudon to come back onto the field. It doesn't work out so well if the Venusaur decides to stay in, but at the same time, you're kind of then seeing the Venusaur go to sleep after that turn. So the return is still not too bad, and the risk there isn't, you know, the risk kind of worth it if you do see the Groudon come in on that slot for Leonardo.
Oh, well, that's exactly what we're seeing here, Lee. Venusaur retreats and Groudon rejoins the field. Now, this is where Rafael had the options, like you said, to try and pick the targets. Goes for the Sludge Bomb down into the Charizard. Not enough to pick up the KO, but does a decent chunk of damage. Charizard still sleeping, however, and Yawn is going to come out once again from this Umbreon. So Rafael seems to be in a really kind of good rhythm here of just going for Yawn into that slot, making Leonardo forced to make those switches.
Yeah, but the situation's changed slightly now. The Venusaur, which was kind of outspeeding everything, has lost its Sun, losing that Chlorophyll boost. So the Charizard, if it does potentially wake up here, could remove the Venusaur from the field, but then would be susceptible to maybe another Yawn from that Umbreon. And Umbreon's shown why it's such a good utility Pokemon, support Pokemon for trainers to kind of use because of that Yawn. It's really forcing Leonardo in and out of that kind of Groudon slot each turn and making it hard to utilize the Pokemon there, and really preventing kind of that momentum build that he's kind of looking for, especially with that Groudon Charizard on the field. If you can get the wake up, of course, with the Charizard here and just throw out maybe even a Heat Wave, it would be a useful turn to take advantage of the Charizard in this situation. But of course, it's risky. The wake up is never guaranteed.
We also haven't seen any Dynamax as of yet, Lee. This is still something for our Pokemon trainers to be able to utilize at some point in the game. It's just picking your moment, and Charizard picks an excellent moment to wake up, able to connect the Heat Wave in both of Raphael's Pokemon. Yes, it won't have the Sun boost, but it's enough to still pick up the KO against the Venusaur, revealing its Life Orb on that as well, so going to be dealing a quite strong punch with the fire type moves. It will, however, have to take the Snarl as well from that Umbreon, so that is going to reduce its special attack slightly, and also the special attack of that opposing Venusaur.
Yeah, and it's a really nice, another really nice supportive option here from the Umbreon. Opting this time not to go for the Yawn, but predicting maybe the Venusaur to come in and just lower that special attack on both the Venusaur and the Groudon. Now, an interesting choice here from Rafael, not opting for the Regieleki. That would have made more sense so you can pressure the Charizard, but bringing in the Groudon here, and it's actually a really nice play, because if that Charizard stays out on the field for Leonardo, the Solar Power ability probably will be enough to kind of edge it over and pick up the knockout there by itself without actually having to do anything. So you could potentially just protect here, and the Venusaur not going to be hitting as hard because of the Snarl from the Umbreon. So the Groudon looking like quite a big threat right now, but has to worry, of course, as always, about a potential Sleep Powder coming out from Leonardo's side of the field on that Venusaur.
Yeah, I think this is where the items get really interesting. You can see a little sneak peek on that Groudon that it is carrying the Lumberry. So one Sleep Powder it can take. But like you said, Lee, that Sun Up on that Venusaur, it's going to be really fast. And yes, you can take one, but if you haven't got a way to deal with that Venusaur, it's going to be able to Sleep Powder again on the following turn. But we have got our first Dynamax of the match. It is indeed going to be that Venusaur. Leonardo not opting to go for any Sleep Powders on this particular occasion, just maybe wants to go for the damage and utilize the fact that Venusaur is sitting pretty healthy on the field, will get its double HP and can really kind of gain the maximum potential out of this Dynamax turn. Rafael, however, is going to match that, going to be Dynamaxing up the Groudon, and I think this is a really good strategy from him here, being able to apply a lot of pressure, maybe trying to start setting up the special defense by going for something like a Max Quake into that opposing Venusaur.
Yeah, now if I was Rafael, I'd really like to see that Max Guard come out here just to prevent any kind of damages turning and allow the Charizard to go down to the solar power. But like you say, if you can start kind of stacking up the special defense boosts here on your Groudon this early on, it's going to make things a lot easier for you to kind of progress in this match. But taking a big G-Max Vine Lash from the Venusaur, maybe a bit too much damage. The Charizard going down now after getting the final heat wave off, and the Groudon going to be able to get some damage back in return onto this Venusaur. It's going to be a Max Quake, and we'll be interested to see how much damage it does. A good amount of damage, but is the special defense boost going to be enough for Groudon to be able to take another G-Max Vine Lash, especially with this residual damage it is stacking up every turn?
Yeah, that really was such a dynamic turn of events. You know, the grass type move coming out from the Venusaur did a huge chunk of damage to the Groudon, and I think you hit sort of the key there, Lee. Those residual effects are going to be chipping away at that Groudon, even if it has got that special defense boost. The vines aren't really going to care about that too much. They're still going to keep chipping away at your Pokemon. I think Charizard, yes, it has KO'd itself, but it was able to pick up that KO against Rafael and also do a decent amount of damage to the Groudon, putting it in a really precarious situation.
Yeah, in range now to be knocked out this turn, potentially, if it doesn't Max Guard. You're kind of, if you are Rafael, you're hoping to maybe be able to get another Snarl off with your Umbreon, but even if you do, you're still at the point where you're taking that residual damage, and it shows just how impactful these G-Max attacks can be, these signature attacks from the starter trio from Charizard, Venusaur, and Blastoise that they have access to. The residual damage is so impactful in these games, and just being able to get it off, like you've seen here, is just sometimes just a bit too much for the opposing Pokemon to be able to handle.
The Sun, once again, really benefiting the speed of that Venusaur. It's able to go for another G-Max Vine Lash right down into that Groudon and pick up the KO, leaving Raphael just the Umbreon here on the field. Looks like Umbreon was able to dodge out of the way, though, of the move coming out from the Groudon and able to fire off a foul play in return. It does activate the berry onto Groudon, so going to regain a little bit of health thanks to its citrus berry there. But Umbreon, of course, going to have to take that residual effect as well. And with the speeds being advantageous for Leonardo, it looks like he's going to be able to wrap this one up.
Yeah, pretty easily here. The Umbreon in a not the greatest of positions, such low health at this point, and even with their -1 special attack on the Venusaur, it's going to have enough to be able to pick up a knockout against Umbreon, and not normally a Pokemon that carries Protect either, so like you've said, with the speed kind of advantage that Leonardo's got, going to be able to wrap this one up and manage that match really well. So Leonardo taking game 1 here and our first set today.
Yeah, and it's always interesting as well when you see sets where the players have got really similar Pokemon. You know, we saw the Venusaurs and the Groudons coming out into action there, and of course the Regielekis. But I think the thing that was interesting were those kind of different item choices. Having the berry on the Groudon, for example, for Leonardo meant that it could potentially have fallen victim to something like a sleep powder, whereas the Groudon on Raphael's side didn't have to worry about that so much with having access to the Lumberry, and it does just throw a slightly different dynamic into the mix. The thing that I thought was really interesting, though, is in comparison to yesterday, where we saw quite a lot of very early game Dynamaxes, here in day 2 things have started out with those Dynamaxes coming potentially a little bit later on into the set, and that can sometimes be where you need things to be to kind of tip the scale in your favor and kind of close out a game.
Yeah, and I think Leonardo showed in particularly how kind of being a little bit more patient in the game can be a lot more rewarding in the end result sometimes, you know. I think that the big pick here for me personally is that Charizard. I think obviously Leonardo brought the Charizard. It was a lot more threatening for things like the Venusaur. It did get put to sleep, but I think Leonardo was in a position where the Charizard wasn't really too threatened. It was always difficult for Rafael to kind of bring the Regieleki onto the field and at the perfect moment to really deal with the Charizard. So maybe Rafael looks and says, well, that Charizard was so difficult for me to deal with. It was so effective in that match, although it wasn't the thing that kind of closed the match out. It was disruptive enough for me to think maybe it might be a better option, a more offensive option than the Umbreon, and not taking away anything from the Umbreon. The Yawn, the Snarl support, the Foul Player, great options, but because it really hasn't got that kind of speed advantage over anything, and it's kind of a sit and duck most of the time, it's going to be hit twice before it's able to function. It makes it difficult to kind of justify sometimes bringing it to a match where you kind of need something like Charizard, where it can get that last bit of damage off that you need, and how we saw how important it was when the Charizard did wake up. There's just that little bit of additional damage onto the Groudon with the heat wave was so important there for just locking the game for Leonardo.
and particularly if you can utilize your Charizard in stun with that solar power ability, it can deal out so much damage on the battlefield. Well, let's see if there are going to be any changes between our Pokemon as we jump into game 2, see if our trainers maybe want to shake things up a little bit, or if they're going to stick with the same kind of strategy that we saw piloted in game 1. It's going to be a Venusaur and Charizard lead out there for Leonardo. However, on Rafael's side of the field, sticking with the Umbreon and the Regieleki.
Yeah, it's a nice adaptation here for Leonardo. You know, he's got both the Charizard and the Venusaur out on the field, and probably has the Groudon in the back, which he can bring in to utilize either the Charizard Solar Power or the Venusaur's Chlorophyll, depending on what you want to go for. Obviously, the Regieleki again on the field for Rafael. A nice option. It puts a lot of pressure onto that Charizard. Throws up questions, though. Do you want to throw out an electric attack for the Groudon just to come in on that Charizard slot? Or do you want to risk it? Especially being 1-0 down at the moment, it maybe isn't a risk you want to take, and you want to play a bit more conservative with Regieleki in particular.
Well, benefiting the Venusaur, the Groudon has jumped into the action to set the sun, and I really like this play by Leonardo. The one thing you might take is a foul play, but it means you're not going to have your Charizard damaged by any electric type moves from the Regieleki. Venusaur will be taking the speed drop, however, going to drop down to -1 speed, but Venusaur's now sitting in a really prime position going into this next turn. It goes straight for the Sleep Powder as well into the Umbreon, so Groudon doesn't even have to risk taking a potential foul play here. It also stops any potential snarls or yawns that we saw earlier in game 1 being disruptive to Leonardo.
Yeah, it's a really nice play there from Leonardo, you know, just going straight for that Sleep Powder onto the Umbreon. It was such a kind of a problem for Leonardo in that first game, where he had to constantly switch out his Groudon to the Venusaur to the Groudon again, just to get around those yawns and prevent any more of his Pokemon being put to sleep. But now shutting it down straight away, knowing the item on it, of course, with the Venusaur landing the Sleep Powder and kind of putting it out of action and making it, rendering it a little bit useless for the next few turns at least, because it's definitely got a guaranteed sleep turn this next turn it comes around.
Regieleki staying on the field, not staying on the field, going for the Volt Switch here to leave the field in the face of this opposing Groudon. Doesn't want to take a Precipice Blades or anything like that. So it gives Rafael the opportunity as well to start switching up the ball position, maybe bring in a Groudon of his own to apply pressure. We might even see something like an earlier Dynamax in this position, start going for those Max Quakes, start dealing some good damage and try and removing the Pokemon that Leonardo has in a strong position here at the moment. There are no Dynamaxes though. It's going to be a Weather Ball coming out from this Venusaur, going to target down into the Groudon, do a decent chunk of damage, over a third of damage into that slot, and it's also going to be followed up by a Precipice Blades that finds its marks on both Pokemon. Not going to be able to pick up a KO, but that Groudon has come in significantly weakened for Rafael.
Yeah, and that's the problem, you know, the Regieleki is so important for Rafael to make sure you've got it kind of intact for the Charizard late game, but by switching it out, it gives your opponent the opportunity to really get some damage onto something like the Groudon, which does make sense, because if you see a Sleep Powder come in on that slot, then you know you've got the Lumberry. But Leonardo kind of reading through that and just saying, I just want damage onto whatever comes in, and really capitalizing in this position. And I have to correct myself as well, the Umbreon actually took a sleep turn that first time around after getting the Sleep Powder, so could have woke up that turn, but I don't know how useful it would be. It might have been a nice opportunity there for Rafael to maybe switch the Umbreon out and get something else onto the field to start really putting a bit more pressure on Leonardo's side, because at the moment there's not really too much offensive pressure coming out from his end.
Well, we're going to see a Dynamax coming up on Leonardo's side of the field. It's going to be that Venusaur. Once again, can start applying pressure with something that G-Max Vine Lash, with the dwindled HP of that Groudon, is going to be able to pick up an easy KO. It's exactly what it does here, but goes down into the Umbreon instead. So Umbreon going to be going down into sort of 51 HP remaining. The residual effects are going to start taking their toll. And like I said, with the dwindling HP there on the Groudon, only a couple of those Vine extra measures are going to be able to pick up the KO eventually. Groudon, however, actually might be able to make things happen a little bit quicker by going for the Precipice Blades, KOing the Groudon on Rafael's side, and putting the Umbreon into a really precarious situation. And poor Umbreon's just unable to wake up, unable to utilize this turn at all, and it will have to return to its Pokeball. So frustrating turn there for Rafael, unable to use the Umbreon at all.
Yeah, and Umbreon, unfortunately, that Sleep Powder really punishing there, and then the G-Max Vine Lash, just the residual damage taking effect, clean it up. And you know, this combination here of the Groudon and the Venusaur is just so overpowering. Regieleki and the Venusaur coming in for Rafael, so he's still got access to Gigantamax, the Venusaur if he chooses to, but he's kind of got to really act now to start trying to get big damage onto the Groudon and hopefully trying to remove it. But again, Leonardo has a pretty easy switch into either the Charizard Charizard in the back, which, you know, is a little bit risky because that could be read into, especially by Rafael at this point. He's been forced into a corner, so he could maybe make that call, but it is risky again, Thunderbolting or Volt Switching into something like a Groudon here and it not switch out, and then you would get punished and it would be game over.
Yeah, Leonardo really has come into this game too, being able to deal a huge amount of damage and capitalize on the switches that Rafael has been forced to make. You know, being able to get the damage on that Groudon so early on was pivotal. But Venusaur on Rafael's side is still very, very healthy. It's now Gigantamaxed up, and it can apply a lot of pressure in its own way as well. Regieleki just going to be going for a Protect here, knowing there could very well be a Precipice Blades coming out from that opposing Groudon. And the Venusaur is actually going to go for a Max Flare that has come off the Weather Ball in the sun, outspeeds the Venusaur, and picks up a solid KO thanks to it being super effective damage. That's certainly a turn of events, and I never thought I'd see a Max Flare coming out from a Venusaur, Lee.
Wow, the tables have turned here, and Rafael pulls himself straight back into this one, you know. A great turn, and we are going to see a Precipice Blades come out, but being able to remove the opposing Venusaur is a huge feat here, because, you know, the opposing Venusaur on Leonardo's side of the field had taken an Electric Web earlier on in the game, so that kind of speed drop giving Rafael a real speed advantage here to be able to get the Max Flare off, which you said, Lou, we never really see too often from a little Venusaur.
Yeah, it allowed Rafael to be that little bit more fearless, and having the confidence to be able to know that your Venusaur is going to outspeed, and now it can apply that pressure again to the opposing Groudon. You don't even have to worry about the fake out from the Incineroar. If your Gigantamax, the fake out is unable to flinch you, so you can apply pressure to the Groudon here. You can also try and apply pressure to something like the Incineroar, try and deal some damage with the Regieleki and just do a decent chunk of damage with the Venusaur. It might well be enough to pick up a KO. It just depends how well trained this Incineroar is.
Yeah, and the Incineroar coming in here makes it very difficult to kind of preserve your Regieleki here for Rafael. So nice play again from Leonardo to kind of capitalize in the position of that Regieleki protecting the last turn. And as we've already mentioned, you kind of need to have the Regieleki sticking around until that Charizard comes back onto the field, because Venusaur not really the Pokemon that can deal with it as effectively as Regieleki can.
I love this synergy though. The Max Ooze coming out, going to boost up the special attack of both Pokemon, including that Regieleki before it's able to move. It's able to go for that Thunderbolt into the Incineroar, but it is not enough to pick up a KO despite the boost. Meaning that the Incineroar is going to be able to retaliate. We saw the damage coming out from the Groudon. It did avoid the Regieleki, but Venusaur is going to be KO'd, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's a little bit unfortunate for Rafael. Losing the Venusaur kind of means that the Groudon just gets the automatic win here. There is no way that Rafael has a way to deal with the Groudon now. Regieleki just doesn't have the kind of tools or moves at its disposal to be able to tackle the Groudon, and one Precipice Blades is going to be enough. So, Leonardo, you kind of identifying a really clever win condition there, where if I remove the Venusaur this turn, not entertain the fake out like I was planning to, I know my Incineroar is going to be able to take those attacks, then Groudon just auto wins this match, and that's what we've seen, and Leonardo really kind of dictates